The night Ethan Vance left for London, Caleb Davis became an alpha. Soon after, word came back that Ethan, too, had presented as an alpha. In that moment, Caleb understood that the fragile, unspoken thing between them was severed for good. 5 years later, an embossed invitation brought Caleb to the Vance family's sprawling estate for Ethan's homecoming. Inside the grand ballroom, surrounded by crystal and muted chatter, a crisis was quietly unfolding. He found Ethan cornered in a secluded alcove, radiating a feverish heat. Caleb knew what was happening before he was close enough to see the unnatural flush on Ethan's skin. The air, thick with the scent of sandalwood and something sharp like citrus, told him Ethan was in a rut. As an alpha, Caleb's instincts screamed at him to retreat from the overwhelming pheromones of another. His hand went to the back of his own neck, a protective gesture he wasn't even aware of making. He was about to turn, to find someone, anyone from the Vance family, when Ethan's eyes slowly opened. The pheromones in the air intensified, taking on an aggressive edge. Caleb instinctively called out his name, his voice tight. Ethan flinched, looking up, his eyes bloodshot and lashes damp. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face as he recognized Caleb. Ethan whispered his name, and the oppressive atmosphere in the alcove seemed to soften almost instantly. Caleb, seeing the state he was in, asked where his inhibitors were, offering to get them. He figured it was a simple enough courtesy. For a long moment, Ethan didn't answer. Then, he rose unsteadily to his feet and moved toward Caleb, admitting he had run out and hadn't found the time to get more. A dangerous glint in Ethan's eyes sent a chill down Caleb's spine. Caleb turned to flee, but in a flash, he was pinned against the cool marble wall, his wrists captured in an iron grip. The scent of sandalwood was suffocating, flooding Caleb's senses and making his legs tremble. During his rut, Ethan's strength was immense. He was held fast, unable to move. Ethan leaned in close, his voice a raw whisper against Caleb's ear, pleading for help. For a few seconds, Caleb's mind went blank. They were both alphas. An awful premonition bloomed in his chest. True to his fears, Ethan then bit down hard on the nape of his neck. For an alpha to be marked by another is an agonizing violation. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot through Caleb. Tears streamed from his eyes as his body instinctively fought back, releasing his own pheromones, a mix of cedarwood and rain, in a desperate attempt to repel the assault. For 10 minutes, the two scents battled, a storm of sandalwood and cedarwood warring in the small space until Caleb's strength finally gave out. Ethan, lost to his instincts, touched the mark on Caleb's neck with a sense of despair, murmuring about why his pheromones wouldn't hold, why the mark wouldn't stay. It was a known fact that an alpha could not permanently mark another alpha. With those words, he collapsed against Caleb, unconscious. Caleb slid him to the floor, his own body shaking. After a few minutes, as his head cleared, the searing pain in his neck returned. He cursed under his breath, glaring at Ethan's still form. He called a friend, telling them where to find Ethan, before covering the back of his neck and running. The consequences of the bite manifested as a high fever that left Caleb drained for days. His mother, Mrs. Davis, watched him with a worried frown, questioning what had happened at the party and remarking on the strange new scent clinging to him. She hesitantly asked if he was seeing someone. Caleb just pulled the covers over his head and mumbled for her to leave him alone, his neck still throbbing with a dull ache. 2 days later, just as he was starting to feel human again, a call came from Ethan's father. Mr. Vance explained that Ethan's rut should have been over by now, and Caleb, still furious about the bite, agreed to go over. When he arrived, the Vance family doctor was there, and Ethan's bedroom door was locked tight. Mr. Vance explained that the rut had started at the banquet, which Caleb obviously knew. But something was wrong. Since that night, the inhibitors had stopped working on Ethan. Mr. Vance sighed, adding that Ethan had been calling out Caleb's name in his delirium. Caleb reluctantly admitted that Ethan had bitten him, creating a temporary mark. The revelation stunned both Mr. Vance and the doctor. They spoke at the same time, marveling that Ethan had managed to mark another alpha. The doctor, after hearing Caleb's brief explanation of that night, theorized that this was the reason for the inhibitor's failure. He concluded that the only solution was for Caleb to stay with Ethan through the remainder of his rut. The doctor suggested it might be a side effect of one alpha marking another. Caleb was bewildered. He was the one who had been bitten, yet Ethan was the one with the side effects. Mr. Vance took his hand, his expression earnest, and promised to explain the situation to Caleb's parents. He said he would send them both to a separate house to ride it out. Before he could fully process it, Caleb found himself at a sleek, modern house in the hills overlooking the city, with an equally modern, pajama-clad Ethan sitting on the sofa, awake and lucid. There was no escaping it. Caleb resigned himself to the situation, telling himself that as soon as Ethan's rut was over, they were done for good. Ethan kept glancing at him, then finally spoke, his voice soft, complaining of feeling unwell. Caleb, trying to remain detached, asked what was wrong and offered to call the doctor. In this state, Ethan seemed strangely docile. Ethan shook his head, stood up, and sat next to Caleb on the sofa, confessing that he needed Caleb's pheromones. Caleb frowned, knowing alphas were naturally repulsed by each other's scents. But Ethan just lowered his eyes and insisted it would be fine. So Caleb slowly released his scent. At noon, Mr. Vance dropped off lunch and a bag of necessities, including a change of clothes and Caleb's laptop. That evening, Caleb made pasta, and Ethan ate most of it. Afterwards, Caleb tried to work, but Ethan went to take a shower and, 3 minutes later, called out that he couldn't find the body wash. Caleb, rolling his eyes, carried the new bottle to the bathroom door, psyching himself up. He decided against knocking, simply placing the bottle on the floor and quickly walking away, calling out that he'd left it for him. Felt too intimate standing there at the bathroom door. Later, when Caleb went to shower himself, he discovered that the bathroom was already stocked with body wash. The bottle he'd brought remained unopened. He realized Ethan had tricked him. Furious, he went to confront him but found Ethan sitting on the bed, holding the t-shirt Caleb had worn earlier that day. When Caleb entered, Ethan looked up, his gaze heavy and unsettlingly familiar. Caleb hesitated, then said his name. Ethan put down the shirt, his voice husky, and said he wanted to bite him again. The scent of sandalwood began to fill the room once more. Ethan's breathing grew heavy, his eyes dark. Since the night of the party, Caleb found he wasn't as repulsed by Ethan's pheromones as he should have been. It had been days, and with the inhibitors being useless, Ethan must have been in agony. With a deep sigh, Caleb walked over and sat on the bed, exposing his neck. He told Ethan to be gentle. Ethan wrapped his arms around him from behind, apologizing just before he bit down, harder and more cruelly than the first time. The pain was so intense that Caleb's consciousness flickered. When he came to, Ethan was still holding him. Caleb tried to push him away, but Ethan held his hand, telling him not to move. Then he felt Ethan press a soft kiss to the mark. Caleb froze. The bite could be explained away by the rut, but this was different. He pushed Ethan away, his face flushed, and told him to go to sleep. He tried to leave for the other room, but Ethan stopped him, asking where he was going. When Caleb told him, Ethan simply let go. But the night was far from over. A short while later, Ethan knocked on his door, claiming he couldn't put on the suppression patch and needed help. Caleb impatiently applied it for him, and Ethan smiled, wishing him good night. Minutes later, another knock. This time, he couldn't find his charger. Caleb silently handed his over. The third time Ethan knocked, he held out a bottle of water, saying he couldn't unscrew it. Caleb finally snapped, gritting his teeth and demanding to know if his hands were broken. Ethan looked at him with wide, innocent eyes, claiming his hands were too weak. Caleb snatched the bottle, twisted it open, and shoved it back into Ethan's chest, him that one more knock would earn him a black eye. A minute after lying down, his door opened again. Ethan stood there, holding a pillow, seriously explaining that his air conditioner was broken. Caleb knew he was defeated. He irritably told him to get in but to be quiet. Ethan slid under the covers obediently and wished him good night. Caleb lay there rigidly, unable to sleep. Just as he started to drift off, he felt Ethan's leg drape over his, pinning him down. Ethan mumbled sleepily for him to stop moving. Caleb shot back that he wouldn't have to if Ethan hadn't come in. In the darkness, Ethan offered to sing him a lullaby. And somehow, in that strange position, they both fell asleep. The next morning, Caleb woke up in Ethan's arms. He was numb to the strangeness of it all. He gently extricated himself before Ethan woke up. On the day Ethan's rut ended, an unspoken distance grew between them. He was the old Ethan again, remote and self-possessed. That night, Ethan cooked dinner as a thank you. When it was time for bed, Caleb found himself unconsciously waiting for the familiar knock on his door, but it never came. Ethan simply closed Caleb's door for him, wished him a good night's rest, and walked away. The rut was over. Their arrangement was over. The next morning, as Caleb packed his things, a strange heat began to build inside him. His own rut was starting. The scent of cedarwood and rain filled the air, thick and uncontrolled. Ethan noticed immediately. Caleb's hands trembled as he held his suitcase. Ethan's worried voice called his name, but Caleb couldn't look at him. He demanded an inhibitor, then remembered Ethan didn't have any that worked. He tried to push past him, but Ethan blocked his way, telling him he was in no condition to drive. His breathing grew heavy. Looking at Ethan, he felt an overwhelming urge to close the distance between them. In a gesture of surrender, Ethan released his own pheromones and tilted his head, offering his neck. The open submission was almost more than Caleb could bear. The look in Ethan's eyes seemed to say he could do whatever he wanted. Caleb knew how painful the mark between alphas was. He hesitated. Seeing his indecision, Ethan spoke, his voice calm, saying that since Caleb had helped him, it was only fair. The implication struck Caleb like a slap. So, anyone could mark him now? Was it just a transaction? He shoved Ethan away with all his strength and demanded he call someone to bring inhibitors. Ethan's composure shattered. He told Caleb he wouldn't be able to hold on, his voice laced with anxiety. But then he made the call, his voice tight with anger. When the inhibitors arrived 17 minutes later, Ethan's hands shook as he opened the box. He accused Caleb of having guts, preferring to suffer. His chest heaved, but his hands were gentle as he administered the injection. Caleb fell into a hazy sleep, the scent of sandalwood, now gentle and slightly bitter, surrounding him. He dreamed of a hot summer afternoon years ago, in his bedroom, sitting beside Ethan as they studied for exams. He remembered the careless way their arms would brush against each other. They had both looked up at the same time and laughed. Ethan had put down his pen and lightly pinched the back of Caleb's neck, teasing him. Then the room had fallen quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Caleb had turned to say something, but Ethan had leaned in and kissed him. It was clumsy and uncertain, their teeth knocking together, but neither of them pulled away. The dream ended with the memory of a text message, received the day after Ethan had left for London. Two alphas can't be together. It's impossible for you and me. When he woke, he was in the bedroom, with the faint smell of sandalwood still in the air. Ethan was in the kitchen wearing an apron. He informed Caleb that he had spoken with Caleb's mother, and she agreed he should stay there until his rut was over. Ethan looked at him expectantly, adding quickly that he could cook, as Caleb already knew. Caleb couldn't find a reason to refuse. That night, Ethan came to his room with a pillow again. Just as Caleb was about to protest, Ethan released his pheromones, a subtle, questioning scent that made it impossible for Caleb to refuse. The following days were a study in frustration. Ethan would parade in front of him with his shirt unbuttoned, exposing his collarbone. He'd come out of the shower with his pajama top hanging open, asking Caleb to smell his new body wash. Caleb would pull his clothes straight and tell him he was an alpha and should remember that. Ethan would just pout. One day, when Caleb's rut was at its peak, he discovered Ethan had hidden his inhibitors. He confronted him, and Ethan, looking innocent, claimed he'd used them all. They stared each other down until Ethan finally asked for a reason. He wanted to know why Caleb would rather suffer than mark him. The question brought back all the old hurt from that text message. Caleb said, word for word, that it was because they were both alphas. He told him that if Ethan were an omega, he would be more than willing, but it was a pity he wasn't. The words were meant to hurt, to throw back the rejection he had felt for 5 years. Ethan shot up from the bed and grabbed his collar, shaking with anger. He asked if Caleb knew what he was saying, if any omega would do. Caleb, seeing the raw pain in Ethan's eyes, realized something was wrong. He retorted that Ethan himself had said it was impossible. Ethan looked at him, utterly shocked, and asked when he had ever said such a thing. Caleb reminded him of the text message. Ethan's expression shifted from shocked to furious. He shook his head, insisting he never sent it, that he didn't know anything about it. If Ethan hadn't sent it, then who did? Ethan pulled him into a hug, his voice pleading, asking Caleb to believe him. And almost instinctively, Caleb did. Before Ethan could explain further, the doorbell rang. Standing on the doorstep was a slender man who introduced himself as Leo, Ethan's omega. Caleb blinked slowly and invited him in. A minute later, Ethan was sitting on the sofa with a thunderous expression, questioning Caleb if he had brought an omega home for himself. Leo, looking on the verge of tears, told Ethan his name, but Ethan coldly told him to stay away from Caleb. Caleb, unable to bear it, urged Ethan to think again. Ethan paused, then seemed to remember something, frowning at Leo and asking why he was back in the country. Leo said he was there for Ethan, of course. Ethan asked why he would follow him, and Leo, aggrieved, asked if he had forgotten their happy life abroad. As Leo began to cry, Caleb, thoroughly enjoying the drama, handed him a tissue and called Ethan a scumbag. Ethan shot him a look and retreated to the kitchen. Caleb and Leo started chatting, and soon Leo whispered that there was nothing between him and Ethan. Their parents had forced a few meetings. Caleb smiled and told him he knew he was acting, admitting he'd seen him use eye drops through the peephole. Leo looked crestfallen. They conspired to continue the act. When Ethan returned, Leo tearfully declared that alphas should be with omegas, and that he and Ethan were destined to be together. Before Caleb could speak, Ethan calmly asked who made that rule. Leo played his final card, claiming that Ethan's grandfather wanted them to marry. Ethan was momentarily stunned into silence. Caleb had known since high school that Ethan's grandfather disliked him. Ethan's mother, on the other hand, had adored him and always hoped one of them would present as an omega. Now, Caleb could guess who had used Ethan's phone to send that text. Ethan sat down next to Caleb and took his hand. He told Leo that if his grandfather was so fond of him, he should marry him instead. He said there was only one person he wanted to marry. Leo, his acting skills at their peak, pointed a trembling finger at them, asking if they weren't afraid of what people would say about two alphas. They remained silent. Finally, Leo ran out, crying. Ethan then asked Caleb softly if he was afraid. Caleb turned his head and smiled, asking who was he to be afraid. Ethan laughed with him, then leaned in and nipped his ear, calling him a little liar for colluding with Leo, revealing that he had seen through the act as well. Ethan then explained everything. His grandfather, the true patriarch of the Vance family, had orchestrated his departure to London the moment Caleb presented as an alpha. The man had gambled on Caleb being an omega. When that failed, he had taken Ethan's phone and sent the message that broke them apart. But he had underestimated Ethan's determination to claw his way back to Caleb by gaining control of the family business over the next 5 years. Ethan kissed him, murmuring that Caleb had always been the softer one. Caleb bit him back playfully, saying that for this one time, he would bet on them again. Ethan released his pheromones, exposing the back of his neck. Now, there was no reason to refuse. Caleb never did move out of that house. Ethan, with a serious expression, pointed out that Caleb had marked him and now refused to take responsibility. He agreed with Leo. Caleb was indeed a scumbag. Caleb suppressed a smile, replying that Ethan had bitten him too, and by that logic they were even.